Hello, everybody. This is Marshall Poe. I'm the founder of the New Books Network. And if you're listening to this podcast on the New Books Network, I bet you like to read. I know that I do. That's why I founded the New Books Network. So as readers, we need to know what to read. And I have a podcast to recommend for you, that being the Proofread podcast. Do you have a goal to read more this year? How about a goal to read more of what you love and less of what you don't? The Proofread podcast is here to help you. Hosted by Casey and Tyler, two English professors and avid readers with busy lives, Proofread helps you decide what books are worth spending your precious time on and what books aren't. They have 15-minute episodes that give you everything you need to know about a book to decide if you should read it or skip it. They offer a brief synopsis, there's fun and witty commentary, and there are no spoilers and no sponsored reviews. Life's too short to read a bad book, so subscribe to the Proofread podcast today. And by the way, there's a new season coming soon.
This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. Psst, healthcare pros, word's out, and it's too good to keep quiet. Look, LinkedIn is revolutionizing job hunting, making it possible to search by specialty, shift preference, and salary. Endless scrolling is out. Whether it's a mental health therapist or dental hygienist, finding the perfect role is faster and easier than ever. Head to linkedin.com/healthcare and start your search today.
Hey, this is Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast, here to tell you that Michelob Ultra, the official beer partner of the NBA, is bringing NBA fans closer than ever this season with chances to win great prizes, including courtside tickets. Enter now at michelobultra.com/courtside. Michelob Ultra courtside 25 to 26. No purchase necessary. Open to U.S. residents 21 plus. Begins on October 1st, 2025 and ends on June 30th, 2026. Multiple entry periods. See official rules at michelobultra.com/courtside for free entry deadlines, prizes, and details.
Welcome to the New Books Network.
I'm Chris Holmes, and this is Burned by Books. Here you'll find interviews with writers you already love, like Jennifer Egan and Rebecca Mackay, mixed in with up-and-coming voices like Alexandra Kleeman and Rumaan Alam. You'll find us wherever you listen to podcasts, but check out previous episodes at burnedbybooks.com and on Instagram and Twitter at burnedbybooks. Let's start the show. When the mayor of New York City decides to turn millions of apartments into vacation rentals a la Airbnb, evicting huge swaths of the city, Evie, the protagonist of Emily Hunt Kivel's debut novel, Dwelling, finds herself homeless, uprooted, and in a state of existential despair. Having lost her parents one after the other in quick succession, and with a sister, Elena, who was institutionalized after committing an act of violence in an extreme state of grief, Evie has no choice but to seek out the hospitality of a distant second cousin in Texas. Gulluck, Texas, it turns out, is a place of sprawling ranch homes with endless add-ons that extend out like spiders' legs. It is here that Evie will find herself renting an affordable home inside of an enormous shoe. When locals begin showing up uninvited to request shoe cobbling services, Evie begins to realize that she may have found herself inside a fairy tale. Might she be the second coming of a great eternal shoemaker? Is she tasked with a mission to rescue her sister from an institution that seems bent on cruelty? And how might a magical keymaker, some talking woodland animals, and a mute horn player round out this adventure? Told in a beguiling voice thrumming with the driest of wit, Emily invites us into a world in which cruelties of our own political and social makings are ornamented with characters for whom their most unexpected trait is their devotion to kindness. Emily Hunt Kivel's short fiction has appeared in the Paris Review, Bomb, American Short Fiction, and New England Review, among other publications. She completed her MFA at Columbia University, where she was a Felipe P. de Alba Fellow. She is from California, but now lives in Texas. Dwelling is her first novel. Welcome to Burned by Books, Emily.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
It's so nice to get to talk to you about a novel that I really just loved and was really consumed by. The fairy tale genre, while very much a part of the history of a contemporary literary fiction, is still somewhat of a rarity. Why did you decide that this story needed to be told in that very particular form and with a huge number of fairy tale intertexts operating inside Dwelling?
I think that's a great question. I mean, I think first of all, at the time of writing Dwelling, it was 2021, early 2021. And so I think I had been spending a lot of time, alone or with my husband or amongst a very, very limited group of people and reading and living in my head and actually looking to art and interiority and books and texts to make the world feel expansive.
Mhm.
And I think that fairy tales and folk tales are some of the best at doing that in terms of literature. The world feels guided by mysterious forces, both sinister and benevolent, right? But in fairy tales. And I think that is kind of how I was feeling
Mhm.
at the time. And so I think it was part of just the kind of iconography that was living in my brain at the time was very much informed by folk tales and fairy tales. But once I arrived at this premise of this woman who is, cast out of New York during this massive eviction housing crisis and moves into a shoe,
Mhm.
I knew that it was going to be a quest and a folktale quest. And so it just I think it was just this merging of where my interests as a writer were heading with this premise that I think required a world or a setting that was expansive and generous and really, really open to imagination.
Hmm. Hmm. Would you describe for us a little bit what the world of Gulluck, Texas looks like with its magic key makers and precious seeds?
Yes, absolutely. So Gulluck, Texas, in theory, it's quite a fictional town, but it is in theory placed in Northwest Texas, which, if you're familiar with the area, is often thought of as quite flat, as plains, these never-ending plains, arid. And so Gulluck, I think, from the first blast, if one were to enter the town, has some of that. And it's a small town. It probably looks like many small towns that are slowly becoming bigger in different kind of more rural or suburban areas of the country. But I was interested in the idea that once you walk into a key shop or walk into a real estate agent's house, things start contorting. And I was so interested in the idea of the architecture of the interior rather than the exterior. And I know that obviously Evie's house is from an exterior perspective, very, very unique, right?
Yeah.
But was really, really interested in walking into places that from the outside don't seem special. And yet when you walk in, you're almost in a funhouse mirror of the world bending and being something stranger than you thought it was. So yes.
This is reminding me a little bit of The House of Leaves with its, I don't know if you're familiar with that book.
I'm not, but tell me.
Oh, well, it's this amazing architectural novel in which this man determines that the house that he lives in is by many, many extrapolations larger than its exterior would deem possible.
Oh, I love that.
And it becomes its genre turns into horror. Nothing, there are no monsters or nothing scary, but just the existential terror of an internal architecture just being vast and unknowable.
I love
it's pretty
that.
amazing.
Who's the author?
Oh God, I'm going to forget his name. He has a brand new book out after years and years and years, because that is a cult classic on the level of The Secret History. People carry it around and are intensely in love with it. But I will link to it on the website with this episode.
Yeah,
so
I can't wait to read it. Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's a really, really great parallel. I think I was also at the time thinking a lot of The Baron in the Trees. Just that.
is that fine?
It's Hello Calvino.
Okay. I don't think I've ever read that.
Oh gosh, you're gonna love it if you like.
Okay. I love Calvino, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's about this baron who is, this aristocratic young man in Italy who all of a sudden one day decides to go live in the trees and never touch his feet to the earth ever again. And he, develops a network, a small society in the canopy of trees in this, very fertile green area of Italy. And I don't know, there's something very folkloric about that, obviously, but also there's this idea of different interior spaces and different lives and homes being hidden in plain sight to me that I was finding so fascinating at the time.
Mm-hmm. For me, and you've talked about this a little bit in your answer, but what I love about fairy tales is they're equally defined by whimsy as well as cruelty. And it seemed that you very much wanted to exploit that melange in this novel. Were you thinking about that mixture?
Yes, absolutely. And I don't even know if I was, and I think that's whimsy and cruelty is so true of fairy tales. I think I was quite interested in Evie retreating from a world that was spiritually quite violent, via exploitation, via physical violence, via resource mongering, and retreating into a different world that was defined by kindness, but also gentleness, and I think that gentleness is something that is so rare to find right now. I think that even the positive elements of our society are so loud and aggressive,
Yeah.
And so I think the idea of focusing a book on gentleness and on the expansiveness that can generate was quite interesting to me. And so again, I think a lot of these things just so naturally fell into a folk fairy tale form that it wasn't even almost as that I was looking to folk fairy tales to inform how the book was going to go, but it was so obvious to me that was the form it needed to take.
I'm now thinking of having gone on vacation to Norway this summer and leaving the Oslo airport and returning to JFK. And if you need an example of how we don't operate in a world of gentleness, then you just need to do that once.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I had a very similar experience traveling to Japan and I think flying back through maybe LAX or something. And it was similar. As soon as we touched down, I felt like the world was just contracting with aggression.
Yeah. I lived in Japan for over a year. And when I came home, I found that it took so long to adjust to the decibel level of everything.
Gosh, yes, I know. Yes, so I think maybe there's something about the setting of Gulluck to me where there's a quietness to it. It's not a city. Gulluck is not a city that is announcing its wonders to the world. In fact, it's doing quite the opposite. It's trying to keep most of its attractive qualities secret, and that's just so kind of. That's so the opposite. That's so antithetical to the way society is operating right now.
Yeah. No, that's so true. So you have tons of fantastic intertexts in the novel, like too many for me to name, and I'm sure I missed half of them. But Goldilocks, Rapunzel, Old Mother Hubbard, on and on and on. And I was fascinated by the balance that you struck between having them resonate, but also you're really interested in shaping them to your own interests and devices. So can you talk about how those fairy tales come into the text and how you really take charge of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is my own perspective. I feel like I'm walking through the world and seeing absurd and funny and strange and eccentric things all the time, and so I think part of it was feeling like some of these, archetypes and images are not as unique to fairy tales as we might think. Even the old woman who lived in the shoe, right? Obviously, the image of an old woman living in a shoe is unique, but the idea of an old woman, having to live in a really weird house because she's, economically addled is not,
Yeah. I hadn't thought of it that way, but oh yeah, you're so right.
Yeah, so I think that to me, and even the idea that obviously there's this idea that once Evie starts wearing the right kind of shoes, she can access courageous and almost limitless parts of herself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, I think there's something, obviously there's the 7 League Boots reference, but there's also some Princess and the Pea quality to that. And I think the idea that people are limited not because they are physically limited by things that are holding them back and making them uncomfortable and making them restricted, that is not new either, So I think a lot of these fairy tale themes and images are deeply relevant, and all one really needs to do is have them in mind as they go through their day, and they'll see them.
And you have no interest in princes in shining armor. In fact, men are often sort of giant withering failures. The key maker, Bertie, being a key exception.
Yeah.
Even he stays back from the adventure. He helps fashion a key, but he knows that the adventure is for Evie to have. And I thought that was an important part of what you were doing in your shaping as well.
Yes, absolutely. And and I think it's interesting. I think it's a rather easy subversion of fairy tales to be like, the men are dumb and the women are great, And that's not what I wanted to do,
No. And the Obid is like partially disappointing.
I know.
As a man.
And Obed is all of us, I think.
Yeah, it's true.
But no, but you are, I think, pointing out something interesting, whereas I think the story is one of, it's a personal journey of empowerment for Evie. But that does not mean that she doesn't take help from people. And
animals.
And animals. Exactly. Like men, women, and animals are all a part of her journey, but it is still her journey. And I think, again, this just goes back to the idea of reciprocity and generosity, right? Like she is a good friend, a good cousin, a good sister, a good, lover. And because of that, people are willing to help her, right? And so I think there's something about reciprocity and kindness that is at the core of Evie's journey.
Yeah.
But I did like the idea that Evie is both going to be the lost heroine, the damsel in distress, the hero, the rescuer. She plays all of the roles. And to me, that was quite fun to write from a, character development perspective.
Oh, I bet. Is the novel in conversation at all with Stephen Sondheim's Into the Woods?
That is so fun that you asked. It's funny. I was not even familiar with, I knew Sondheim, but I had never seen the play until I had finished the book. And then I saw the play. I saw some of my students put on Into the Woods, and I was like, man, there's some really resonant themes.
There's a lot.
In the type of humor, So I love that you got that. That was, but I do think it shows that there is something in the field that people see with these fairy tales, and they see this kind of dry, dark humor that approach to them.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso. Gift magical mornings with Nespresso Virtuo Pop. Compact and stylish, Virtuo Pop is made to meet every morning coffee craving. From espresso to coffee, hot or iced, at the click of a button. And celebrate the season with Nespresso's limited edition coffee flavors. Sweet almond and hibiscus, cinnamon and candied tamarind, and festive double espresso. Magic in the making. Shop the holiday gift collection exclusively at Nespresso.com.
Did my card go through?
Oh no.
Your small business depends on its internet. So switch to Verizon Business. And you could get LTE business internet starting at $39 a month when paired with select business mobile plans. That's unlimited data for unlimited business.
There we go.
Get the internet you need at the price you want. Verizon Business. Starting price for LTE business internet, 25 megabits per second unlimited data plan with select Verizon Business smartphone plan savings. Terms apply.
Yeah. I think it was in the air, even if it wasn't your direct intertext.
Yeah.
So going with shoes as your central framing metaphor, fashioning them both as an ancient and celebrated art form and a lightly magical means of adventuring and comfort, has some risks involved. It could have been the case that this focus on shoes would be read as an allegory giving meaning to the gendered way in which women are seen by pop culture as obsessive about their shoes. But instead, the magic is in the shoe's ability to be both ornamented and practical. So why shoes? And were you aware of the sort of the complications of making them your leitmotif?
Yes, I mean, the complications I think weren't top of mind. However, there's a line, I believe, where Noah, Evie's shoemaking guru, says something about high heels. And he says, you can't run in those, or you can't run.
Yeah.
And that is something that I think that's a line that's been living in my head since I was maybe a teenager. The idea that to wear some of these shoes, especially the shoes that I think women are, encouraged to wear, there's an inherent, it's really hard to get anything done in them.
It's a form of violence. And we see that in Edita at the end of the novel and her high heels.
Yes, exactly. Right. And then, she's there. Evie looks at Edita's shoes and there's blood in them. Right. Which is kind of a flashback or a reference to the original Grimm Cinderella where there's blood in a pair of shoes. But to your point, I think I was interested in the complications in them rather than, I think, afraid of any of it being misinterpreted. But I think more than anything, I think inherent in almost all fairy tales is the idea of a journey. Someone setting out through an unknown land to do something. and this could be men, women, children, like in Hansel and Gretel. And to me, I think the journey is so defined by how well equipped you are and how physically capable you are of making it. And to me, the idea of Evie fastening and getting into the art form of something that prepares people for journeys, shoes, was so interesting to me. Almost like she's taking part in this foundational quest narrative. And she, in theory, is enabling other people's quests in her art form.
If there's villainy in this novel, it is institutional. The failures of institutions to produce affordable housing, and most ominously, the institution that holds Evie's sister, Elena, like a prisoner. Elena has indeed committed a violent crime, but the treatment of her mental illness is violent and really unforgivable on a societal level. And in the case of Dwelling, institutions are represented by their architecture, and Evie describes the mental institution like a prison. Architects will always tell you that spaces matter and that they create feeling, they're a catalyst for community, and that they express very front-facing the values of a society. Can you talk about Elena's institutionalization and also about the ways in which you wanted architecture to represent the values of society?
Yes, absolutely. I think specifically Elena's institution, which eventually Evie must travel to and break into. Architecturally, I wanted it to almost inhabit the iconography of the looming castle, And it does in many ways, but it's also acting. It also looks like a prison, and in many fairy tales, those two things can be one and the same, right? And so I think from an architectural perspective, there's closed windows, there's gates, there's confusion about how to navigate the buildings themselves, and that's true for a few of the apartments that we learn Evie has lived in as well. And so there's this lack of accessibility, and it's like a spiritual accessibility, There's something about architecturally these places that show you are not welcome here, and it will be very difficult for you to inhabit this space. And I think what was interesting to me, specifically about the institution that Elena is in, is that it's incredibly foreboding. It's cast in shadow because of the way they've kind of built the towers and turrets around the surrounding courtyard. So it's shadowed. There's very little light. But actually, breaking into it is not that hard. which to me, and they require, it's not super easy, but it requires some cleverness. But So to me, that
It wasn't like Fort Knox.
yes. And so to me, that was quite interesting. It was like, oh, well, part of the power of these institutions is the power we give them. And, and they also wield incredible, actual power. But part of Evie's journey is reimagining society, not just society, but the way she reacts to society and and the way what she does and doesn't value in the spaces that she does and doesn't feel she belongs in. And so the idea that the institution is something that is so unwelcoming, looks so foreboding, and yet Evie is able to, by reimagining it and her access to it, get into.
Yeah.
Almost takes the power away from it spiritually. And that was, I think, even without maybe, I don't think I consciously was doing that, but I didn't want it to be so hard for her to get in. I wanted it to be something that required creativity and reassessment rather than, actual, fashioning of some kind of ram, or whatever.
Although I would have enjoyed the fashioning of a
That
ram.
would have been good. Yeah. That maybe too late, but that would have been fun.
Next one.
Yeah.
At one point in the novel, when considering what happened to her sister in the asylum, quote, they had drugged her, bussed her away in the night, fed her crackers and gruel. She realizes that she doesn't have the language with which to properly describe that kind of horror. And perhaps that's what this novel is in part attempting to do, to give a shape to language that shakes us awake to the inequities and horrors happening all around us. Do you find that to be true?
I mean, I think that's a really beautiful interpretation. I think certainly, the inequities and horrors that we are seeing and experiencing can be, I think, understood when we look to ancient texts sometimes. And I think that by framing some of these seemingly quite contemporary problems of Elena and Evie in the folklore and fairy tale world, I think it shows that these are problems that have existed for a very long time, right? I mean, so many fairy tales, original fairy tales, are based on housing scarcity. The stepmother is there and she's worried that the stepdaughter is gonna, take food from her mouth. I mean, Hansel and Gretel are cast out because I think there's a famine. There's this scarcity of resources.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So there's this scarcity of resources that is, I think, at the heart of so many folk tales, fairy tales, fables. And I think sometimes we forget that, we forget that there's I think recognition and maybe a sense of, I don't know, redemption and solace when we look to stories to start interpreting our world.
Well, now I feel like my question is even better because of the way you just framed it there in terms of the inciting events to these fairy tales, which I didn't think about at all. But I think that's such an interesting way to return to them and think about them and to think anew about your book. I mean, we've been talking about kindness and generosity and reciprocity, to use a number of the words that you feel are central here. And I felt like that's one of the really original things, at least for our moment, about Dwelling, is that you've written something where you've kind of overridden one of the kind of primary driving things about story, which is like the location of people who are wrong or bad or villainous. And you've made even them deserving of kindness. I mean, a wonderful example is, Evie seeing a young girl thieving apples from her apple tree in her new home and seeing that as an opportunity for connection, empathy, generosity, kindness. And that seems to layer her whole world with a luxurious frosting of generosity. And this feels very different to me. Are you aware of a kind of genre of the contemporary novel that really leans in this way on generosity, or did you feel like you were trying something new?
I think I definitely felt like I was trying something new, and I haven't read every book in the world, but I do think that
No.
I know. One day, I,
Keep at it.
I do think I was, uh, I think I was aware of this trend in contemporary fiction to lean into solipsism and misanthropy. And and it's quite interesting because, as a person, I think, in conversation as I inhabit my day-to-day life, I am quite a misanthrope. I mean, I'm not, I'm not like a super, I don't know, a nice person. Not that I'm mean, but I'm not like going through the world with rose-colored glasses or anything. But I do think that I was reading these so many books that felt quite maudlin, and there was a monotony to them in a way. And so I think I was really interested in harnessing story and conflict and creativity and anxiety. Like, this is a book that I think is born out of anxiety and a collective anxiety that many people have about
Yeah,
something.
absolutely.
And harnessing that towards, not to sound really corny, but like hope. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and to me, there was something interestingly subversive about that. The idea that, like, in a contemporary fiction landscape where so much is about, I don't know, the toxicity of others,
Mm-hmm.
there felt like there was something subversive in not doing that. And
I think so.
yeah, and I think there's always something, I think, in me that really bucks against trends in contemporary fiction. And I think this was it was a really fun exercise born out of that in some ways.
I found myself being struck by the fact that it's sort of impossible to read Dwelling Now without being changed by the victory of Zoran Mamdani in New York City,
Yeah.
whose platform really rested on the idea of housing affordability.
Yes.
And I wonder if you read your novel differently now that Mamdani will be the mayor of New York.
I don't think I necessarily read the novel differently, though I think I do see that this novel is only one version. Evie decides to defy a society that doesn't want her and exploits her and relegates her to a very, very small corner of itself by leaving it, by actively leaving, which I think is fair. But I think there's something so beautiful and hopeful about the fact that Mamdani has won the mayoral race, because it shows that there's also a version where people stay and fight, and that is not what Evie does. She fights it personally, and it's Evie's is a very personal journey. So I think it shows me that there's many different hopeful ways to defy this, like, incredibly exploitative capitalist hoarding of resources. And so I think that Dwelling covers one version, but I think that there's a really, really beautiful version that we may well see,
That's really nicely said. Emily, before I let you go, I'm wondering if you would have a couple of recommendations of things you've been reading and loving recently that you might want to share to my listeners.
Yeah. So actually, I was just kind of looking around, and the bookshelf that I have right near me as we're talking has 3 books that I just really love, all next to each other. And I kind of thought it'd be fun to just recommend those.
That's great. I love that.
So, and they're 2 are very undwelling, and one is very. So, Wise Blood, Flannery O'Connor.
Okay.
Very not dwelling, but
Misanthropic.
but also a demented journey for sure. And so,
yeah, true. With emphasis on the dementia.
yes, with emphasis on that. Let's see. I've got Binstead's Safari by Rachel Ingalls. Are you familiar with that one?
No. Rachel Ingalls wrote that. What's her most famous?
Mrs. Caliban.
Yeah, Mrs. Caliban.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, which I adored. And so I read this other book by her. And actually, I actually was kind of inspired by this while writing Dwelling. It's about a woman.
What's the name of it again?
Binstead's Safari.
Okay.
And there are, I don't know if I forget if there's talking animals, but there's definitely a man-lion hybrid. So, if that sounds up your alley, great.
Yeah.
And then there's a really great kind of more literary theory book by Marina Warner, who I just adore. And she writes quite a bit about folk and fairy tales. And she wrote this quite slim novel about, I guess, like the foundations of fairy tale narrative, which I did read in the revision process for Dwelling. And it's called Once Upon a Time. And she's so brilliant and elegant. And she really, really does a good job of making fairy tale words and fairy tale analysis feel quite elevated and sophisticated and mysterious. And so I recommend that to anyone who's interested in those archetypes and that way of forming narrative.
Well, what a wonderfully eclectic range of recommendations. And I can't wait to recommend to my listeners Dwelling by Emily Hunt Kivel. It bucks the trends of contemporary fiction in the form of a wonderful fairy tale, folklore, adventure story quest with a narrative voice that is so unique and so catching to the ear that you won't soon forget it. And it was really so lovely to get to talk to you about it, Emily.
It was so fun. Thanks for asking such thoughtful questions.
Thank you. Well, that's all for me for now. My thanks to Emily Hunt Kivel for coming on to talk about her brilliant debut novel, Dwelling. You can find links to purchase Dwelling and all of Emily's recommended books at the website, burnedbybooks.com. There you'll find all of our previous episodes, links to buy a podcast t-shirt, and ways to get in contact. As you listen, take a moment to rate the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. Until next time, this has been Burned by Books.